Greetings, everyone. Here we are already wrapping up July 2025. We have a couple of fantastic questions from our group over on Patreon. And if you are curious about joining that group, click the link down in the video details below. I've created a little tour video for you so you can see everything that's in there, what our plant spirit journeys are that we do every month, the catalog of advanced classes, courses, all these different things, and of course, the incredible community. And every month on the 20th, we post a little question call. Post your questions. What do you want to talk about? What do you want to hear about? Sometimes I turn those things into full classes. Sometimes I take the rest of them and we just have a straight shot conversation like we're having today, answering them. So I just printed out the questions from July. I've got them right here, and let's do 3 of them right now. So beginning with fantastic question from Chase, and I'm just going to read this one verbatim. Can you speak on the differences in Western philosophies of constitutional healing? This is such a cool topic and such a great question. Vitalism versus homeopathy, right? I may be misunderstanding, but I'm under the impression that vitalism is essentially using the virtue opposite a condition to bring things back into harmony, right? The example given, adding heat to balance out an excessively cold disharmony. But homeopathy is using the same virtue as the condition because it's assumed the body knows what it needs. So if there is a condition that's excessively cold, we tip the scales colder because the body is trying to be cold for a reason. We'll help it get there by leaning further into that energetic pathology and by also supplying a little bit of an instigation for the body to reactivate that process. Take a fresh look at it, right? This view of homeopathy is what 7 Herbs, Plants as Teachers by Matt Wood appears to suggest, but I could have completely misunderstood. Nope, you're absolutely on target, and Matthew Wood is definitely the wrench in the Vitalist Herbalism machine, right? Matt Wood comes from homeopaths. I think his father and his grandfather were both very well-known homeopaths, if I remember correctly, so he approaches herbalism very much from that way of thinking. And one of the greatest things that I've taken from his teachings, because I really love what most of what he talks about, is low dose. And that low dose thing also comes from homeopathic perspective, right? If we look at many other traditions of herbalism, especially TCM and Ayurveda, the doses tend to be pretty heroic. Whereas when you get into vitalism, especially vitalism that's been influenced by homeopathy, the dose gets really, really small. For that same reason, that we sort of trust that the body knows how to heal itself, we're just providing wisdom. We're just providing like a little bit of resource for that to happen. So true Western vitalism is based on energetics, and it is based on the process of harmonization, right? Addressing an excessively dry manifestation of disease with moistening herbs that speak both to the body system being affected and whatever pathology is manifesting. So this is an important part of vitalism is and Western energetic herbalism, right, is we're not just thinking about the energetic of an herb. Is the herb hot, cold, wet, dry? Is it stimulating or sedating? We're also ensuring that the herb has an affinity with the body system that's got a problem and speaks to the pathological function. So for example, if somebody has a dry, hot, crackly, burning cough with very little production of phlegm on the coughing, rather the lungs feel tight, they feel like they're dried out, the person is craving for water, and the cough is hacking and generally not very productive, and we're seeing some heat signs too in the lung spots, maybe on the tongue or the face. We would of course think, we're not going to put a drying respiratory herb on top of this already dry cough. We're going to put a moistening respiratory herb on top of this dry cough. So, we might think of horehound or mullein, but we think about mullein and horehound because not only are they moistening herbs, but they're herbs that have a direct affinity with the lungs. They're going to bring their demulcent action directly into the lung tissue. And maybe they'll go somewhere else after that, and that's okay too. I tend to think they do. Other people don't. But we also, choose those herbs for that. In homeopathy, sometimes the like virtue doesn't have to have a direct affinity with the body system. It's more looked at systemically. So there's another really big difference that I think is interesting. So Matt Wood's particular approach, working with therapeutic extracts of herbs, meaning they're not HPUS, they're not homeopathic preparations, they're a tincture or a tea, but dosing them and choosing the herb based on like heals like. Whereas the rest of Vitalism and every other Western herbal tradition, right? If we think about the humoral tradition, for example, is always provide the body with what it needs based on the overcorrection. So as you mentioned in your example, too cold of a situation, let us provide warmth. And the idea is just that that's what we do instinctively, right? When the body gets cold, we try to warm it up. We turn the heater up, or we put blankets on, or we rub our hands together. There's this intuitive thing that even though the body knows what it needs, sometimes it needs help getting there. The body knows that it needs to be warm, but sometimes we don't have the faculties to warm up. So we bring in practices and tools and herbs that do that. So hopefully that's helpful. Matthew Wood's teachings are very unique in Western herbalism. I think it's worth everybody studying, especially his Traditions of Western Herbalism book. Very, very important. I'll put a link to that down below. Yeah, super cool to think about. Many different approaches. All of them can be effective, which I really like. Thank you, Chase. Great question. Heather, where do I want to start? When I make flower essences, I have a hard time with adding so much alcohol. Another herbalist I talked with said they make flower essences without alcohol and just work with the essence for a few days. What are your thoughts on working with a pure essence rather than the standard ratio, which contains a lot of alcohol? This is totally fine, in my opinion. The alcohol in tinctures, or in flower essences, the alcohol in flower essences, which if we look back to Edward Bach, he was teaching to put brandy, because brandy is a softer, sweeter, more stable type of alcohol, whereas vodka and gin and whiskey are more fiery and dispersive kinds of alcohol. It's just there as a fixative. It's there to fix the vibrations of the essence, and it's also there as a preservative, because if it's just water sitting in a bottle, it can get gross, right? It can go bad. There's microorganisms in there that can, build and build and build and build until you just have something nasty. So that's that. Definitely you can make a flower essence and preserve it other ways, maybe keeping it cold. If you think about cold things slowing down and solidifying, maybe you keep it in the fridge for less than a week. Maybe you, like you said, you just finish it quickly. You do small batches. Maybe you look at other kinds of ways to stabilize. And I've actually thought a lot about why alcohol is the only fixative that we think about in terms of energetic medicine. Now, alcohol is the best fixative when we're talking about therapeutic doses of herbs, like in a tincture. Alcohol works, right? But when we're talking about energetic medicine, where we want the energetic imprint, the signature of a plant, and that's really all we're worried about. We don't care about getting a therapeutic dose of the constituents, the chemistry of the plant. Why is it that alcohol is the only or the best? I think about, what about particular gemstones? What about, having a piece of quartz crystal in the essence and having that crystal in there as a sort of fixative, as something grounding to the essence? I've thought a lot about that. Of course, that stone would need to be purified and programmed in a way that would support the work. maybe the type of container or the place where it's kept could also be part of that. I don't know. But I guess what I'm trying to get to is the alcohol has a purpose, and as long as that purpose is not important, like you're going to go through the essence faster, then you don't really need it. I think there are some purists from the Bach tradition who would say that the energetic imprint on the water will start to unfold and unwind based on the environment that it's in without the alcohol holding it together. So you'd have to think your way around that too. But again, I do think there's probably a way wherever there's some will, right? So super cool to think about. Let me know what you come up with. I'm curious. Good question, Heather. Thank you. Last question for this month from Donald. What's a good way to figure out what elemental type a person is? Whether they be airy or fiery, earthy or watery. This is something I have struggled with because since we contain all four, I have a hard time refining it down to the one that is more dominant, as do we all, right? This is like a very common issue, so I appreciate this question so much. I definitely present elemental constitutional model in this way where it's like, figure out which one you are and then you know, but it's not always that easy. I would say that 80 to 90% of the time in clinic when I'm with a client, I have two dominant elements on their chart by the end of the session, by the time we get to the assessment and making a protocol. So even me, I almost never can get it down to one. So here is one way you could try that I think is super fun, and I do this a lot too. Break yourself up into parts. Think about your physical body only, just your physical body, just your leech, right? What element is your physical body most like? And you could go solely on appearance. You could go solely on function. However that makes sense to you. You could do 5 different things and average them out, whatever works for you. Then think about your mental atmosphere, how you think, how your brain works, how you engage with the world, what your interests and hobbies are, and define that, right? And then maybe you could do the same thing with your emotional body, thinking about what fires you up, what maxes you out, all of that, and give that. And then maybe you could think about your spiritual self and other things as well, right? Compartmentalize yourself, give each compartment its own ruling element, and then step back from it and say, 3 out of 5 of these things are fiery. That's interesting. Maybe I'm a fiery dominant person. I have to do this with some clients to really figure them out. And when people struggle, they say, I really feel like I'm all 4. This is what I do. We compartmentalize. The other thing is more of a meditative process whereby you sit with each element in meditation, in creative visualization, or maybe engaging with them directly in nature. And you really try to sink into which one feels the most at home to you, which one feels the most like you, which one feels like you are seen and mirrored and welcomed the most. And sometimes that's an interesting back door because we're coming at it rather than thinking in terms of human expressions of elements, we're thinking about it in nature's expressions of elements and how they then reference the elements within. So honestly, that's kind of a good practice for all of us, because when we talk about the inner fire of the human spirit, we're also talking about the fire that heats our food, and the forest fire, and the fire of a lightning strike, and the fire of Sana, the sun, right? So it's really good for us, I think, to connect with those different elemental expressions outside of the human body too. So not an easy answer really on that one, other than a couple of things you can try to get a little bit closer. And another thing would be, I should mention, look at your pathways of least resistance with illness. This is like always a really interesting one. So make a list of the last 3 things that you've struggled with. Maybe it was a cold, and maybe it was a chronic condition, and maybe you broke a bone. And you really unpack each of those things and say, how did my body respond to that? Was there coldness? Was there heat? Was there fluidity? Was there stagnation? what was happening, and you break each of those pathologies down, and oftentimes you will see a consistent. You'll see like, wow, when I get sick, I get hot and feverish and angry and anxious. And when I broke my bone, it healed a little slowly because I had so much hot inflammation that would not flush. And I have this chronic illness that's got a lot of heat behind it. You know, maybe there's a digestive thing and there's a lot of acidity and heat in the belly. And you're saying, oh, there's fire in all of these three things that have happened in my body. And generally, the body will move into a disease state through the pathway of least resistance, which means the more fiery you are as a person, the more likely you are to develop an excessively fiery disease condition, right? It's very hard for the body. It's a ton of work, which the body doesn't like to do a lot of work when the body's already struggling, to take somebody who is on this side of the spectrum being fiery and move them all the way over into a disease state of coldness, right? They already run here, so it's easy to just aggravate here. Now, if somebody's essential fire drops out for some reason, then of course cold relates, and this is a little more nuanced because then it's less about an excess of cold and more about a deficiency of fire that's causing the coldness. Save that for another time. But you can look at your general patterns when it comes to your body struggling with things, and that can also give a little bit of a third insight. So hopefully that's helpful. Thank you guys so much for the questions, all the questions from Patreon that we didn't get to and answered over there, all the ones I'm going to turn into classes, and then these, of course, so much fun. Links down in the video, deets below. I'll see you guys next week. Take